All right, we are live. Okay, so on behalf of MSU Denver, the College of Business, Department of Management, and the Center for Entrepreneurship, welcome to Women Entrepreneur Week. My name is Becky Prater, and I'll be the host. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. One housekeeping note, if you have questions for our guests today, please ask them in the chat function, and we'll get to as many as we can. So today we're so fortunate to have with us Kimberly Arnold. She is the CEO, Chief Strategy Officer, and founder of Escalate Solutions. Kimberly is a cross-disciplinary executive, entrepreneur, and four-time business owner. Her experience as a futurist, leading-edge management consultant has allowed her to work alongside clients in most major industry categories, presenting strategy and technology, best and next practices to ideate distinguishing value propositions and to improve operational agility, scale, speed, scope, and reach. Kimberly is currently on the advisory board for the MSU Denver's Department of Management and Center for Entrepreneurship. We're so fortunate to have Kimberly as an advisor for our department and here today as our guest. So welcome, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Oh my gosh, we're so glad to have you as part of our program because you're just such an impressive businesswoman. So I'm thrilled. Okay, so first I want you to tell us about your business, how you got into it, and what inspired you to get into this particular business.
Absolutely. Well, again, good morning to everyone. Thanks for being here. Again, my name is Kim Arnold. I live in Highlands Ranch. I grew up here in Colorado. As Becky had said, I actually became an owner of two additional businesses. I was not the founder of those companies, but I was hired on to companies that were rapidly growing, aggressively growing, scaling, and diversifying. And I was hired on as a marketing role, an operations role, a variety of capacities, and they were all small businesses. And in those environments, you tend to wear a lot of hats and get exposure to different aspects of business. And I became an owner of an architecture and construction company, turnkey design build firm. And after that, I went over to a different group that was a global market research firm. And in the first case, we went from one division to four. We were an Inc. 500, so I'm dating myself, now it's Inc. 5000, but the Inc. 500 fastest growing small businesses. And the second, we went from one division to 8. And really were successful at both horizontal and vertical diversification. And what I realized, it wasn't necessarily the industries that we were in, and those were tourism, leisure, hospitality, and gaming primarily. But I loved that process of what it takes to launch a company, to grow, to scale a company, and then to sustain it for the long term. And those functions are very, very different. Those life cycles, in this environment and this high-tech age that we're in, those life cycles evolve very quickly. And a lot of leaders and companies struggle with going through those changes and shifts within the business operation. And so I launched Escalate Solutions to be a company, an advisory company. I'm a management consultant, strategic planner, that really helps companies focus on that intersection of strategy, operations, and technology, and just getting through the rapid changes that we see. Why I did that, I guess, it was personal and professional. I'll share with you that at the time that happened, my daughter, who's had a lot of health issues, she was going through 2.5 years of chemotherapy for leukemia. And I was traveling all around the world, at least 4 or 5 months out of the year. And it was just really difficult. So part of being an entrepreneur is that, you get to have both the flexibility as well as 100% of the responsibility. So definitely more risk. But it was an opportunity for me to have more control over my schedule, over my future, how I was working, And I think I had a skill set of really understanding what makes businesses work. I had seen what had made several businesses fail. And I just wanted to kind of blend that, give myself my own company to run on my own terms, and to share my expertise with as many businesses as I could.
Wow. Now tell us about your educational background.
I went to Colorado State University. So I grew up in Arvada, and I went on a full ride scholarship to CSU. I finished there in 3 years. You'll find it funny. So my undergraduate was political science and international relations with a focus on Middle Eastern studies. And I went to the University of Virginia to study Arabic. And I thought I would be, working for the CIA or Department of Defense. And I was a little ahead of my time. It was pre 9/11. They weren't hiring as many Arabic speakers at the time. So I often wonder when I'm asked the question of, where did you think you were going to be and how different? That's the one thing I think about if I had gone through that program just a few years later, what I might be doing today. But and I'm a big advocate of continuous learning. And I've recently, in the last couple of years, one of my pivots was really to focus more on digital transformation. So I did go through and participate in 3 additional certifications through Cornell. And those were online courses: data analytics, finance, business strategy. And then I also achieved some certifications from MIT in digital transformation, and a few others from different programs focused on the elements of digital transformation, those cybersecurity, cloud, et cetera, just to up my technical expertise in those areas. And they were just programs that were available online. So I'm always learning. I'm still doing additional classes to this day. You just can never stop learning.
No doubt. That is fantastic. Hey, so Kimberly, tell us some of your biggest challenges that you faced in this job that the business that you have, or your business experience in general.
I think one of the reasons why I became an entrepreneur is that, the greatest challenge I always saw had to do with people or culture. And when you aren't necessarily one of the drivers of that, it can lead to a lot of challenges and a business not really maximizing their full potential. So I would say that most of the issues that I've run into have been related to issues of the corporate culture in the businesses that I was in. I think I actually would not say that I've had challenges in being a woman. I've actually had a lot of doors open up for me because of that. And I've had mentors that were both men and women. There's been some recognition in the community. There's been board openings that have come my way specifically due to that. But that I think is the biggest challenge, whether you're an entrepreneur or just a business leader, and how you navigate, those personalities and what the power play that sometimes happens. And the bigger the company, it tends to be even more so.
Wow. So I noticed that your first job situation, or the first business that you were in, and then the second business that you were in, were completely different. Like one was construction and then the other one was entertainment. How did you adapt to that, or how did you see yourself moving easily into that different space?
A couple of things. One, they were both in the same industries. And in fact, the second company was one that we used to utilize them all the time in our design build initiatives. And I oversaw client relations, marketing, and our growth strategy. And there were a lot of times that we needed a consulting firm to do market research for the projects to help make those projects advance. They would require market research. They needed more funding, something of that nature. And so the firm that I ended up going to work with was somebody that I knew very well and had established such a great rapport with, that they said, if you ever decide to make a change, you have a space here and we'll create a job for you. And I loved my first company. In fact, they became my second client when I launched Escalate Solutions. And so I still have a great relationship with them. I was not an architect. I was not a contractor. And it was complicating for the company in terms of the registrations, because they worked all throughout the United States. And it was always an issue that they had non-licensed owners. And the lead owner decided that he was going to retire. And it was just a good time for me to allow the professionals who were in that space, to step up and take over that ownership role. And I was always just going to be limited from a logistics perspective about how much I could own of the business, because I was not a registered professional. So that was the reason why I left, and the only reason. And it was a transition really within the industry. I had client contacts that were able to carry over and paralleled very nicely. And the general environment was the same: high growth, diversification. The aims were the same, even though they were a different function. And I've always been able to go into technical environments, learn what I needed to know. And I think if you understand those fundamentals of business, how to grow a business, how to market an entity, you can do that, whether it's a soda company, a car company, a service-based firm. If you understand those basics, you can apply your skill set in any environment.
Wow. Okay, you mentioned something about technical transformation. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Digital transformation is really it's that process of technology beginning to be the driving force in how a business operates. We've gone through digitization where we just, everything became online. And this is the evolution to where technology really drives what businesses do. And I think even most companies who don't understand that technology is a driving force in their strategy and their operations, it is, whether they realize it or not. The elements of digital transformation are things like the use of cloud, IoT, the cybersecurity components, blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning. Those are the backbone, if you will, the infrastructure that businesses are using to move forward. And it's just, it's fascinating to me. And it's a great, opportunity for me as a strategic advisor. If you look at the research, big companies, small companies, they're spending millions, if not billions of dollars on these technologies. And only about 10% of leaders and executives, C-suites all the way into the Fortune 100, feel like they're really getting the right return back from their investments. So there's a lot of work that's yet to be done. And I see myself fulfilling a niche to advise companies in that vein.
Wow, so forward thinking. I mean, that's on the very forefront of that is where you are. So that's amazing.
And it is. It's I talk a lot. In fact, I spoke for Deva in December to one of her classes about strategic planning and looking at strategy through a traditionalist lens and the futurist lens. And the metrics that we use, they are shifting. And all of the traditional metrics that we're used to seeing, right, they still matter, whether it be, profit, revenues, return on investment, those all matter. But now, whereas we've always just looked strictly at competition, now we have co-opetition or collaboration, hyper collaboration in a lot of industries, where you see these tasks that are so massive that you start seeing, even with COVID, look at Google and Apple coming together, right, to solve this issue about contact tracing. That's unheard of for that to be happening. Things in the blockchain, you see hundreds of companies coming together to find solutions that can benefit all of business. And it really is a different mindset. And I try to help organizations see those tipping points in the evolution. And it really is fascinating and applies to every organization.
Wow. Oh, I love the idea of sort of trend watching, to try to figure out what's next. So that's so nice to hear that. So impressive. Hey, these days you have to be good at so many different things when you're in business. Everybody, like a man, a woman, everybody has to be just so good at so many different things. What are some of the things that you do best?
I think my greatest strength, first and foremost, is just listening to clients. As a management consultant, the worst thing that you can go do is to walk into a room, and start thinking that you have all the answers, and not just listening, but asking the right questions, those strategic questions that get clients thinking about what they hadn't thought of before. You know, I'm a huge advocate of the processes like Agile, Lean, design thinking, taking that deeper dive and helping clients who, you know, when you're an owner of a business and you're in it and you're living it every day, it's hard sometimes to take a step back and see things that you know might be happening that you weren't aware of, you know, how widespread the effects may be, an opportunity that may have been lost. And you know, I think pairing that with my background of being in small businesses and wearing a lot of hats, and I'm a solopreneur now, so I'm my attorney, I'm my accountant. You know, I do all the purchasing, I do all the invoicing, I do everything. And I bring on consultants when I need them, and I use outside resources when I need them. But I think that ability, I call myself a generalist, and I understand a lot about every aspect of business operations. And I think that's where I have value. I can come in, I can understand every department, I can see the links, and I can, you know, I recognize when there's silos, when there's not effective communication, what an ideal department is supposed to be doing. And I come in and I start asking a lot of questions, and I make those clients think through strategic considerations that maybe they hadn't thought of before. I think that's where I add the most value.
Wow, that is just fantastic. So tell us about some of the moments when you pivoted in either in your business or in a business that you're working with.
Yeah, you know, I think there's a couple main pivot points for me. One was, you know, when I made that decision to leave the architecture firm and go over to the management consulting group. And, you know, I was happy where I was. I love the people that I worked with, and it was not an easy decision, but I felt like it was the best path of growth for both me and the organization that I was leaving. But it took a lot of soul searching to get to that point and be able to walk away from something, you know, that I knew was good and positive, and that, you know, I was able to make a difference in that environment, and to open myself up to that next task. And, you know, I think the same thing happened in 2014 when I decided to leave that organization. And I'd been thinking about doing it for a while. And I actually remember the day I have something on my wall from August 22nd, 2014. And I was lucky enough to be nominated for and to be selected by the Denver Business Journal as an outstanding woman in business. And I remember being on that stage. It was a confidence booster in a lot of ways. You know, you could understand why. And I made the decision then, literally that moment, that I was going to do it. And within 3 months, I had sold out my shares of the other company, started my new business, and I had took 2 clients with me and had my first year's worth of business. So one other that was probably a little bit more difficult, at the end of 2016, I was in a very serious car accident, and I spent most of 2017 on disability. And, you know, I had to pivot my business to keep it going. And I used resources of people around me to help fulfill some of those client obligations that I had. And I used that time and going into 2018 to go through those additional educational programs that I mentioned, right? The degrees in data analytics, finance, digital transformation. And I took that opportunity in that downtime, that forced downtime that, you know, I didn't really want to have, but, you know, I used that to my advantage. And I think I recognized it for what it was. It was a pivot opportunity. So, you know, it wasn't ideal that it happened, but I made the most of it and used something that now I'm applying every single day in my practice.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Hey, okay, so tell us, so this whole year, it's been a year now that we've all been sort of shifting and changing and rediscovering ourselves. Mm-hmm. And how has this last year changed your approach to doing business, or, you know, what has it meant for you?
You know, it has. As I had shared with you previously, you know, the entire work from home and the shift in the future of work, luckily that hasn't impacted me as directly because I've worked at home. This is my 7th year. So I didn't have to adapt in that capacity the way a lot of other leaders have. But between juggling, helping educate kids at home, and the biggest thing has been, up until now, at least from my business model for that lens, up until now, I've never had to proactively market my firm. I didn't do a lot of SEO or invest heavily in my website. I had 100% referrals. I've been very involved in the community. I've sat on a number of boards, and I'm always out at a lunch, at an event. I speak at conferences, and none of that, of course, has been happening. So it's particularly from a marketing standpoint and how I outreach to people. I think it's put an enhanced emphasis on our need to maintain touch and reach with people, even if it's virtual. And again, really just trying to listen to people. I've done things like sign up for the Energized Colorado initiative. I signed up. I'm 48 years old. I'm going to turn 49 in a couple weeks. So, I've owned 4 businesses, and I still proactively seek out mentors to help me, right? To think of things just no different than I do for others. So I've sought out mentors, and I've used platforms and asked for introductions to people that maybe I wouldn't have connected with. I changed my strategy about the types of people that I connect with on LinkedIn, and I've become much more open and broad reaching through vehicles like that. And I became a mentor to other companies through the same Energized platform. And I've now advised 7 businesses, totally pro bono, just trying to help others in our Colorado community that have been impacted and see if I can help them in any way. And it gives me a feeling, I think, of still belonging and just, again, constant learning from those individuals. So I'm still getting referrals, but I'm really proactively marketing. And just as a sidebar, I actually also set up another company, which is my 4th company, of something I saw was a need and relates to the digital transformation. And that has to do with remote notary services and online services that are now allowed in Colorado.
Oh my
Saw
God.
an opportunity, and I stood up a company in a couple weeks. So
Wow. So tell us a little bit more about that. Can you give us that's
I needed a notary for something for Escalate Solutions, and the banks were closed and all the typical sources that you go to. And I ended up paying $100 for a mobile notary to come to my house. And I thought, she was here 10 minutes and I just paid her $100. She lives down the street. Maybe I could do this. And we also saw one of the executive orders that the governor signed because of COVID was to allow online notarization. And they've stood up a platform, and it's something that can be done online for convenience. And so I decided I would start a business that would open that up to other people. And it's just a side hustle, but it's something I saw. I think that's the entrepreneur in me. When you see those opportunities, why not? There's a need, I could help out. And so it's just something I'm doing on the side, and I'm exploring how I can look at leveraging that business through the technology side of it, of course.
That is
more to come. We'll see.
You're right about that entrepreneurs have a hard time not doing that. We see opportunities everywhere and, get excited about it, even though we may not continue with something in the end. We jump in and say, okay, maybe this is something I can do. That's Very impressive. Cool. Hey, so for all of you guys out watching, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat, because in just a few minutes, we'll have an opportunity to have you guys ask some of the questions through the chat. So please just put those in. All right, so I want you to tell us something, Kimberly, that would surprise us about your business or about your experience.
I think one of the things that surprises people, because I am a solopreneur and I'm just a one-person shop, is the level of clients that I've worked with, and just the diversity of businesses that I I work with. I think that, a lot of the larger companies, they work with the KPMGs, they work with Accenture and a lot of the larger organizations, and that's understandable. But, I've been able to work with multi-billion-dollar organizations that, if you can connect, it just takes that one person and the ability to make an impact and standing up a network of people around me. I think that's the biggest surprise, that a one-person shop that has this experience can come in and make an impact for a company of any size, scale, scope, industry, location. I think that's the biggest surprise from people.
Now, can you share some of those companies, just because I think people would be amazed?
One example, I just completed a project for TBK Bank. I've worked with a number of gaming operators and tribes. I'm working for one confidentially in Richmond, Virginia right now that I can't mention. But, some of those, organizations that are, hundreds of millions of dollars a year and just in one division. And it's been pretty interesting from that perspective. So I've done work for the city and county of Denver, the airport, Denver International Airport. So, in that vein, and in my past life, I was the sole, consult to companies like, Sands, Las Vegas Sands, which is, one of the largest operators in all of entertainment. So Caesars and MGM and some of those companies that I still am able to work with today.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for that. So one of our guests, or one of our participants here, lovely woman, actually commented earlier about she has had so many more advantages being a woman, just like you mentioned. And I think that is it's a really neat thing for us to be able to stand in our feminine and just hold that and be that, and not try to be like manly in this business, because we bring something so fantastic to it. So she has a couple of questions. She wanted you to describe what a generalist means.
To me, my definition is that, quite simply, that I don't have a particular specialization in only one aspect of operations. And so when I go in and advise businesses, some will advise specifically only on technology, or only on finance, or human resources, or marketing strategy. I think I'm able to come in and holistically look at a business and understand all aspects of the operation. And that's what I mean with that term.
Okay.
That's what I mean with that term.
And then what about, she asked again about, would you describe agility, and what does agility mean for a company?
Those the thought process of Agile is really about adaptability, speed, scope, scale. And if you study some of those practices, some will put lean design thinking kind of into that broader label, and they all have a bit of a difference. But it really was an outgrowth of technology, and particularly for software firms. I was just joking with a friend the other day about, you remember when we used to have to update, our operating system, right? And you wouldn't have a computer for 24 hours. Well, everything has been broken down now. They use in technology, they use containers, they use microservices, and it's about breaking things into smaller pieces, so that if you need to change something, you don't change the entire infrastructure, you change that piece. And Agile practices, and as they relate to most engineering firms, is we have a 2-week goal, right? This is what we're going to do. And every single day, you literally come with your team, your small team, you stand up and you say, this is what I did yesterday. This is what I'm doing today. This is what I need help with. And everything is broken down into these small goals and objectives, and you go fast, right? It's all about speed and adaptability. And I think that practice and that mindset can be utilized by every single business operation, whether they're a technology firm or a service-based firm. One of the greatest challenges that I see time and time again in businesses is that they have these, to use the Jim Collins phrase, the big, hairy, audacious goals, and they get lost and they don't make enough progress in the day-to-day, because it's great to think big, but you also have to have specific tasks and objectives that you can achieve in a week's time, in 2 weeks' time. And if you break those things down, you can really do better at making progress. So to me, that's a big part of an agile business. And it's been very helpful, especially in this COVID environment, for organizations to take a step back, look at what has to be done in 2 weeks, right? Think about restaurants and how quickly they were having to adapt to curbside service and takeout, and maybe throwing up an app if they didn't have it. That's an example of being fast, being agile, being adaptable, speed, scope, scale.
Awesome.
I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, that was great. Oh my gosh. All right. So one of the other questions is a really good one. What was your favorite moments during the beginning and now of your company? What have been some really fantastic moments for you?
Fantastic moments. Wow, it's a good question. Anytime that I see the success of the business that I've advised, I had an organization that I was working with that, won an award for, best new business. I helped them launch their business, and they were selected in an industry magazine, as the best new business. So, I personally think of my success being in parallel to those who I advise. So that's where I take my greatest joy. For me personally, I would say it was getting through that year after my car accident in 2016, getting through 2017. And, I really had to relaunch my business. I've done it twice. I was literally off the radar, had to have my spine reconstructed, learn how to walk again, like that serious. So, to come back and be able to relaunch the company, that's by far the thing that I'm most proud of. I launched it once, I actually launched it twice. So to still be here is I'm really proud of it.
Wow. That is astonishing. Oh my gosh. What advice would you have for new entrepreneurs looking to start a business?
I think have a strategy. Understand, you hear a lot, strategy is dead and business is moving too rapidly and strategic planning has gone out the window. I completely disagree with that. To the opposite, I just think strategic planning is more important than ever, and it just has to be done and revisited more frequently, or at least in an ongoing basis. So I personally, I sought out the advice of people around me about what it was going to take to stand up my company. And I was constantly I was making notes about things that I wanted to do and what that needed to look like. But the number one advice is have a strategy of what you think, what you want to do. Clearly understand what you want to do first and foremost. And then you can start backfilling in what it takes in order to make that happen. And that's true if it's a service business or a product business, and build a network of people around you that you can outreach to. I wasn't in a position where I had to go out and raise capital. So I was able to stand up a service business with a laptop and a printer and a couple of clients that I took. Not every organization is like that. So understanding too what the financing networks, those capital raises, what the funding will look like if you need that to get to the next level, and really just start building people around you that you can go through that process with. Be very, very careful about the people you go into business with. Business partnerships are marriages. Divorces can be ugly. And, if you're going to be a business partner with somebody, you better understand what that individual is like, how you complement one another. And those are some of the very first steps that I would advise.
That is such good advice. So it sounds to me like you really can do anything. So really,
I wouldn't go that far.
for people that it's hard to describe sometimes what we do. So when, when somebody says, oh, what do you do for a living? You might list 20 different things, which is hard to sell yourself as a person who does 20 different things. So how is it, what would you say about presenting yourself as a person who is very capable of doing about anything? But how do you do that? How do you refine that down into a business that makes sense to somebody to engage in?
Right. Well, and the question about, I think being a generalist is my greatest strength, but that isn't always the case. There are organizations that go out looking for a specialist in one particular area. And I think, my approach to selling myself is the exact same approach that I use once I'm hired and I'm in the door. I ask a lot of questions and I listen to people, so I don't, if I meet someone and I'm at a business lunch and, potentially there might be a way for me to assist, I just start asking a lot of questions, and I can say, I'm a strategic advisor, I'm a management consultant, right? But then I start asking questions, what is your business like? Well, and it's a lot of times it's about the entrepreneur, the founder, not having enough hours in the day, right? They're not handing off, they're not empowering the next level of leaders, that kind of thing. So I start to listen to cues and challenges, and I provide resources, contacts, and I often do a lot of work on the front end for free, just to show where I have value. That's probably the biggest downside of a business that's been built by referrals through friends, contacts, fellow board members, this entire, this whole network of people that I know in the Denver area or in other industries throughout the country. When you make an initial referral, it's hard to get to that point where you immediately are paying. It's a lot easier to do that when you don't know that person at all. But I'm willing to do that and show my worth to organizations, and so that I can convey my value. A lot of times that's storytelling that I've seen another business that's gone through X. Here's what they did, and here's how I helped them. So that it is a challenge. It's definitely one of those things that I have to overcome in being a generalist.
Excellent. Hey, okay, so here's another thing I was thinking as you were talking about that. You mentioned something about oftentimes the leader or the founder has a hard time delegating. So what would you say in all the work you've been doing, what would maybe be the top 4 reasons why businesses struggle?
That is one is, the first is always the corporate culture and a negative culture. The second I would say is alignment of stakeholders. And I talk about strategic process as 4 steps that are constantly ongoing. There's strategic planning, right? And everybody thinks you develop your plan and you put it on a shelf, but no. The second is the alignment of the stakeholders. And that means every single person in your company understands what your goals and objectives are and what their role is in making that happen. And very rarely can I walk into a group and that is universally done. So getting through that piece. The third thing has to do with what we were talking about in agility and having clear objectives and having them done in a way where you can make progress fast. And so the objectives tend to be, we want to grow and we want to be X size in 2 years. Well, that's great. That's behind the scenes. But what are you going to do about it through this Friday? Right. And so breaking those down into smaller pieces and then making sure that the metrics are right. I see a lot of organizations who aren't evaluating whether or not they're achieving their goals in the right way. They kind of come up with faux metrics, or, it's a great thing about numbers. You can present things in a lot of different ways and show success, but you got to dissect things using different accounting techniques as one example. And I think just if you can go through those 4 questions, do I have the right goals? The strategic planning, am I adding value, right? Am I distinguishing my product from everybody else in my marketplace? I'm a big fan of the blue ocean concept, if everybody's familiar with it. And the idea is that, you don't want to be swimming in the red water, right? All the sharks are there and all the blood is in the water because there's so many people. And part of growing and scaling a company in this environment is you be in the blue ocean. You come up with an idea that somebody else hasn't thought of yet, right? Or a similar product in a different way. There's those 4 buckets of what you're going to do, right? You do what you've been doing. You do what you're doing in a different way. You try, something completely different, or you go into areas that are related to what you do that enables horizontal and vertical growth. Those are the 4 ways to grow a company. And you don't know, you start with saying, have we asked all the questions yet? Are we thinking in the right way? And then once you know the answer to that question, then you get everybody on board. Then you come up with short-term objectives, and then you start making sure that you're measuring it the right way. That's the difference between growing and scaling and sustaining a company.
Wow. Oh my gosh, that's so full of information. Thank you for that. So here's another question I was thinking about. You mentioned one of the first things you mentioned was corporate culture. That's usually a problem. So that's oftentimes a problem with a company. So when you go in, because that's the people that are there, the people that are there. So how do you, how can you make change within a corporate culture as a consultant? How do you do that?
One of the most important things that I always try to do, if they will allow, is to get outside of the C-suite. The people they're the people that are going to hire me. Mm-hmm. But those tend to be the same people who may be failing to recognize what the perceptions are of what's happening at other levels. And it's more true the larger the company, typically. So a client I was working with in Tulsa, for example, they were looking at expanding their geographic reach. And that was what they thought the goal was. And by the end of the project, there was a lot more that was being done in terms of rebuilding the infrastructure of the operation before, they had to get their ducks in a row in one particular area before they could start really moving forward. And it was because I went through and I asked to meet with representatives, junior and senior staff in every single department, because I wanted to see, what they thought of what was happening and what those desires were. And I think that's one of the most important strategies when you dissect a business. Don't just talk to the couple people, people at the top who hired you. You really have to take a deeper dive all the way down through the organization and get their feedback.
Oh my gosh. So when you're working with a client, is it usually, in order to do that, seems like it would take a good bit of time. So how long do you usually spend with the client, and do you have focus groups, or how do you drill down into that information?
Absolutely. It depends on the size of the business and how many people are involved. I just wrapped up at the end of 2020 in a consulting assignment for a group in California. And they had originally hired me to evaluate their economic diversification strategy and to make recommendations about where they should be investing their money for the greatest return on investment. And that was another that quickly turned into, by the way, we've got a lot of issues within the, the corporate culture. We're not making decisions fast. People aren't getting along. We're not on board with what we need to be doing. And they just needed somebody who was impartial, to come in and say, this is what I see. And I did the same thing. I flew out to Sacramento and I spent 3 days one-on-one with every member of the board, with other people from that community. And I just asked questions and I listened. And, I was able to provide them with honest feedback. And I said, if you don't change these 3 things, you're never going to get to where you want to be. So, the one-on-one conversations, the bigger the group, obviously the longer the process can take. And you try to be as expedient. You don't need to talk to every single person. But if you take a representative sample, it really gives you, it's kind of an eye-opening experience about what that culture really looks like. And it tends to be quite shocking sometimes to management.
Oh,
it also surprises me how many times they don't just do that themselves, but it keeps me in business, so I'm all for it.
Yes, it totally does. Hey, so one of our participants asked about how would a person, if you're just kind of starting, and now, I guess, would you talk about how to price your services? Because people think they want to go into business, and the first thing they usually say is, I'm going to be the low cost provider of something because I think that's what needs to happen. But I don't think that's what should happen. So what would you say about that? And as a consultant, how did you come up with your pricing strategy for your business?
Okay. I agree that, unless you are an established business with such a high volume, that's not the best strategy to have. The opposite is true. Where is your value? What do you do? How do you add value to an organization? What do you do that other people don't do? And sometimes that's through an educational role. Sometimes that's through, I've always been in service-based businesses, although I've advised companies on the product side. So I don't know if you want to ask the person who asked the question if they were more interested in a service or a product type. But you look at the market, right? And I understand that getting into the marketplace, if you're new and you want to try to come in as the lowest cost. However, in the long term, that tends to be not the most sustainable in terms of longevity. It can be a point of entry to a market, but I definitely wouldn't advise that being a long-term strategy.
And this particular woman wanted it to be about service. Like she said she's done a lot of work for free too, and wondered, how do you step into charging when mostly you give it away for free? I have this problem too. I give advice every day for free, and someday I need to step in and say, and this is how much I charge.
Absolutely. I personally, I looked at, the big companies, right, as the kind of the top end threshold. And those advisors, those senior principals, some of whom have a lot less experience than me, will charge $1,000 to $1,500 an hour, right? So, but I looked at other advisors. I actually called people that I knew that were doing what I was doing, and I asked them about their billing rates. And a $500 an hour rate is pretty standard. And so I went down below that, but to be honest with you, I rarely will work, on an hourly basis for someone. Coincidentally, in the last couple of weeks, I've done that for a few friends. Just they wanted to pick my brain, knew that, they wanted to pay me for it. So I'm working, on an hourly basis for them. But most of the time, it's a fixed fee. And I gauge, I don't have a standard pricing. Part of it is who that client is and what their own financial position is and what they can afford to pay. So I'll come up and I'll work backward from my hourly rate. My standard rate for a month for someone on a retainer is $10,000 as a benchmark for someone, and for me to be on call and available to them. The California client was one where I did that. It was $10,000 for the month. And everything I did was within that period as kind of a trial to show that I added value, and then they ended up hiring me for additional work. So it depends on the complexity of the services I'm offering. I do compare to other competitors in the space, and that's easy to do on Google. You'll go to a management consultant's website. They tend to have their hours posted or their hourly rates posted. So I found my sweet spot, and I came in, and I also look at what I need. I'm able to go below that because I don't have a secretary, right? I don't have other staff. So those numbers, I think, were inflated somewhat because they were paying an operation, whereas I'm not. And so I think I'm at a very good, at $330, $350 an hour. I feel very comfortable that is enough for me to, live at what I need to do.
I'm so grateful that you shared that with us, because it seems to me, I have this idea that people don't ever talk about money. And I think, how do we learn if we don't know, if we don't ever hear anybody say that? So I really appreciate you giving those numbers. That is just fantastic.
Of course, look at what the market has to bear, but then also look at the individual factors on both sides of the equation. What you need to do to operate and be successful and make money. And what the ability is to, for that client to pay. And I do charge different clients different amounts, because I know sometimes they wouldn't be able to hire me at those other rates. So I do a discount at times.
Excellent. At one point you mentioned that you work with Energize Colorado. Would you tell us more about that?
They are, and I'm a volunteer for them. I was not part of that program, but it really was an initiative by some of Denver's greatest business leaders. Brad Feld was one of the individuals behind it. Governor Polis's office, came in. So it's a public-private partnership, and it's mostly volunteer-based. And their goal was to just help small businesses, rural businesses, minority-owned businesses, and women-owned businesses to get through COVID. That it was, there were a lot of individuals, they just put in their private dollars, and they put forth, they stood up a website very quickly, and they've actually given out, I believe, over $30 million in grants, with a priority to rural businesses, small businesses, and minority and women-owned companies. I did receive a grant myself, because I did have a temporary slow in my work. And they wanted to make sure that these businesses remained viable and would be around in 2021 and beyond. And they put their money where their mouth is. It was an amazing group of successful business leaders, put forth their own money, stood up this organization, and then they outreached to people like me and said, will you mentor? And I did. And I even took advantage of a couple of other, like I said, I became the mentee, and I took advantage of other business leaders that were willing to talk to me. So great group.
That is so, oh my gosh, it makes me proud of our Colorado.
It is. It really is a great organization.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hey, okay, so what do you see is next for you? Like in the next year, in the next 5 years? What is the end game for you? What do you think?
I guess, I'm the type, just my personality, I like to be constantly growing, challenging myself, constantly learning. I could see myself standing up or investing in or being part of some additional companies as well. Back to the opportunities from women-owned business, I have, as of last October, you were no longer able with the federal government to self-declare that you were a women-owned business. You actually have to go through a third party now. There's 4 that are certified by the Small Business Administration. So I went through that process last year as part of my, my pivot after COVID. And so I actually went through the process, got certified by the SBA and a group called WeBank. The US Chamber of Commerce is another group. There's only a few that can certify you. And now that I've gone through that and I have my certifications, I'm actually looking forward to applying and getting on the GSA schedule to have some of those government contracts. So I see myself offering those same management consulting services. I have, if you're familiar with the process, they have codes that define the type of work that you do. And I've achieved 7 or 8 that are all very general: administration, management consulting, strategic planning, human resources, marketing, public relations, that could really be applied to a number of different environments. And there's billions of dollars in contracts that go through there. So I'm going to tap into things like that and leverage, my general skill set, these set asides that exist for women and minority owned businesses. I'm going to tap into those. And I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and just try to help as many businesses as I can. I'm sitting on boards. I'll be on the advisory board for MSU as long as they'll have me. Just trying to be a difference maker, being a mom, raising 2 kids, it's just what I do.
Okay, I love so much that you said that you're interested in getting involved in the government, because I do think there's so much space for us to go in and refine those systems. And it makes my heart warm to think that you would do that, because we need people like you in those spaces. Leaders rather than politicians, I feel. So we need leaders that see things as they should be. Yeah. So, okay, so here's this terrific question. Okay, so
I'm looking at the chat too, so I can see.
Yeah, I'll read it because I do want people to see or hear it. Okay, this person said, I love women in power, and I think what you're doing is amazing. You say that your job requires a lot of listening. I have a hard time listening and absorbing information from people, such as writing down what's important. My mind loves to travel and ask internal questions. What expectations do you set for yourself when listening to your clients? Do you have any recommendations to become a better listener? Great question. I love
Wow, that is a great question. You know, it is a learned skill, I have to say. And I think it's harder for me when I'm by myself. And I will actually tell a client, if I start jumping in, remind me just to listen for a minute, and when you have peers that are working with you, I will ask them a lot of times, tell me, don't just jump right in and make that comment. I think, it's a day-to-day practice that you don't have to just do it in business. You do that with your friends, you do that in all of your relationships. I'll tell you, I was on this this is the epitome of what it's like. I was invited, I don't know if you know who Frank Luntz is. Kind of speaking of the politics, I won't jump in there, but he's a pollster. He's a famous pollster. I'm sure you've all seen him somewhere. And he invited me to sit on one of his panels a couple of weeks ago. And I can just say, I was moderate. There were people at all ends of the spectrum, let's just put it that way. And the entire session, it went 2 hours. There were 40 members of Congress from one of their moderate groups, kind of the, trying to promote and listen to people. And the entire 2 hours was just a lot of people talking over one another. And I sat there, they played it. We were on CNBC and Fox News and all kinds of news channels. And you see, it was a Zoom screen, right? There's 20 people. And for the most part, I was just kind of sitting back like, like this, listening to people who were not listening to one another. And I think, the best advice I can give back is when you're in that moment, right? And you may have a lot to say. The next time you're in that space, you kind of have to force yourself to just kind of sit back, listen to the dialogue, and try to figure out what's inspiring that dialogue, and then ask those questions. And sometimes you have to explain, I'm not asking this sarcastically, I'm really trying to understand you. If it's a heated discussion, and say, tell me where that comes from, and keep taking that deeper dive. And when you're in that situation, force yourself, stop talking, ask a question, and just sit back and really, really listen.
Great advice. Oh, it's so difficult for people to do that. And we see it, we see that talking over each other a lot, and it's so uncomfortable for the observer. So I appreciate that advice.
We've lost the art of healthy debate.
Yeah.
Whether it be in politics or in the business environment. And, I do, there's a lot of times where being a management consultant, you start to blur into the roles of like a life coach / psychiatrist, trying to get people who don't agree on something to get along and find compromise. And what is the saying? The definition of a compromise is no one ends up happy. 100%. But that's okay. But fostering those conversations, books like The Critical Conversations, and having those critical conversations, they're great reads, and there's a lot of them out there. I would recommend those as well. It's hard to have a difficult conversation, a rational conversation, and be able to have a healthy debate. And the art of that has really been lost, and it's something that our educational institutions can help with, and I was always on debate. I love having a good debate with somebody, but it can be really challenging.
Mm-hmm. Hey, so you mentioned something about good reads. What are like 3 of your top books that have kind of guided your life?
Oh, I'm going to pull this up because I actually just finished a really good one that, and it's in this vein. Malcolm Gladwell's, hold on, I'm going to pull this up here. I'm forgetting the name of it off of my Talking to Strangers.
I just read that.
What did you think?
I loved it. I loved that book. I love everything he does.
Yeah. Another one I just finished, Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, I believe is Kahneman. Same kind of mentality. It lends itself to that whole discussion about agile. I'm a big believer. I love reading the political books, historical books, anything like that. Good biography is always favorite. If you're interested in digital transformation, Tony Saldana's Why Digital Transformations Fail is another one that I've recently finished. But in that, just in the discussion about listening and talking to strangers was definitely a good one. I don't know if you know who Annie Duke is, but she was a female professional poker player. And I know she has a new book out, and I haven't, I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but it's about how you make decisions in the moment. Oh. And so that's next on my list.
Now, what about, you mentioned something about the blue sky. I remember reading that a while ago, the idea of being in a place where it's not about competition, you're presenting something in a new way or a new thing. What is that book? Do you remember that one?
I do. I have the authors are Kim and Mauborgne, Mauborgne. I believe they're both professors at Harvard. And Blue Ocean Strategy is the name of the book.
Yeah, Blue Ocean.
And there was a follow-up, Blue Ocean Shift. And it talks about, really businesses rethinking their value and, trying to define yourself differently. And it's all focused on having a unique value proposition. So great reads.
Okay, so one of the last questions, one of our guests asked, tell us a little bit more about the job code thing that the government, how does a person find that information, like the job code, all that kind of thing?
Oh, sure. And you can do this, anybody can do this to get certified with the government, especially if you're a small business, and the parameters are pretty high. So you go in and they have the standard codes. So my lead is 541611. It's management consulting. And there's a whole list of related type organizations under that. And you can search for the NAICS codes through the federal government website. And they have an entire list. And it's from technology and IT to architecture, construction, pencil suppliers. I mean, you name it, there's a code. if you can do it, there's a federal code for it. And if it's something that the federal government might need, and they, big group, they need a lot. So you first start by looking at what those codes are. And it's a multi-tiered process. It's overly convoluted and bureaucratic, as you would expect anything at that level to be. And so I started off by, my first step was to actually go through, as a woman, I went through a group called WeBank, WBENC is the acronym. And they are one of the few organizations that will certify me as a woman-owned business. And so I went through that. It took about 6 months. And I got my certification with the SBA. And then you have to start getting on board with things like SAM, which is the program that they use for obtaining services and products from businesses. And there's just a whole tier of organizations that you have to get within the government. And my next step now is to go through the GSA, the General Services Administration. And the government goes out and they put out public bids, right? You can go to a bidder list. But then they also have, if you're on these schedules for GSA, and one of the schedules is professional services and includes management consulting. And if you get on the list, they don't have to bid out the project. If you're on the list, they will just call and say, are you interested in doing this project? So, there's open bidding like any public entity. And then there's a preferred group, if you will. And they try to give a certain percentage to women-owned businesses, minority businesses, whatnot. So I thought it was worth exploring.
Wow. Okay. What was the WENC? What was that again?
Hold on, I have a certificate behind me. National Women's Business Enterprise Council, the National Council, and the acronym is WBENC.
Okay. Ooh, great. Thank you so much. Yeah. All right. So last thing. Any words of wisdom last words to our community, many of whom already have businesses. So that's one amazing thing about MSU is we've got a lot of people that are actively doing business and coming back to school to add structure to their business.
Mhm.
What would you say? What would you say as 3 points of be sure you do these things?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if that's the case, you're already doing the first, and that is just never stop learning, right? If you are a business owner and if you've already taken the initiative to go back into this incredible program that MSU has put together, the Center for Entrepreneurship, to tap into the continuing education and the resources, build your network and leverage that network. You think about all the people that but rely on those people, outreach to them, build communication channels. You'd be surprised how many people you can just outreach to on LinkedIn and say, look, I saw your background and I just would really love to connect, and will you have a 15-minute conversation with me? And I would say find a mentor and be a mentor as well. You will. I've definitely grown as an entrepreneur, because I learn from my clients every day, and even those who I have these mentor relationships with. It's a two-way learning street, and I get as much out of those relationships as I think the people that I offer guidance to. So open up those doors, start those conversations, take that risk. There's something so different about the DNA of a true entrepreneur. Be prudent, but take that risk. That's what being an entrepreneur is all about. And I will extend, if anybody here is interested in talking to me further, I know that Becky has my contact information. You have permission to share it if anybody is interested. My website is escalatesolutions.com, and you can find my email, and I have a Calendly account. So there's a way to connect with me and go right to my calendar, set a time to meet.
Wow.
So if anybody's interested in that, put your money where your mouth is, right? And got to walk the walk. So
Love that. Thank you so much. Well, Kimberly Arnold. Wow. Thank you so much for speaking to our community today. Thank you also for supporting MSU and our department and the Center for Entrepreneurship. It's such an honor to have you there, and you're so generous, and your heart's it's just in the best place. So I appreciate everything you do, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
I appreciate all of you as well, and I'm a big advocate of entrepreneurs, and our business leaders. We're the ones that are keeping the world going. So good luck to all of you with your initiatives, and really, I mean it. If you want to outreach, I'll look forward to hearing from you.
Oh,